Hi guys, welcome back to Nyx Reads. Today I want to talk about my June wrap-up. Wrap-ups are probably one of my favorite videos to watch to just see what everybody's been reading. Once again, my reading was all over the place genre-wise, so I attempted to segment it in a way that it makes sense, and I'm going to start with my nonfiction reads this time. First of all, I read a book that I picked up in my library sale. It's The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. While I do have the physical copy, I did end up listening to it just because that is my preferred method of nonfiction consumption. So this book is about two things. It's firstly about the 1893 Chicago World Fair, which I have never heard of, but it was this ginormous exposition that happened as a reaction to the French unveiling the Eiffel Tower. So essentially the Americans thought to themselves, we need something spectacular like that. So that's how this came to life. And the second part is following the back then notorious murderer H.H. Holmes, who killed a bunch of different people, women, and he had a very odd pharmacy business going on, and he had this odd side gig going on with selling human cadavers to universities. I agree with what most reviewers say in a way that this book felt extremely disjointed because it is about two completely different things that essentially have almost nothing to do with each other, except that Holmes went to that World Fair at one point, but besides that, it's two different stories. And it really does feel like Erik Larson wanted to write a book about the World Fair because he was genuinely interested in it, and maybe the publishing house or his agent said, no, you need to make it more interesting, so please add this true crime element to your story. And quite frankly, while I usually really do not like true crime, the parts with H.H. Holmes were more interesting to me. So I was always just kind of looking forward to those parts. In general, this was really just 2 out of 5 stars for me. I have to say I did learn some interesting facts though. So for example, I had no clue that the Ferris wheel was debuted at this World Fair. Also, I have a very low cringe threshold. There would be sentences, and especially H.H. Holmes's parts, where the author would write something like, and when the woman crossed the threshold to Holmes's house, she felt a chill running through her spine. And I understand that the author wanted to use this style of writing to make it more engaging, but in my head, I always just thought, is that really what happened? I would still recommend this to people who know what they're getting into. Just be aware that you're getting 2 different stories in one book. And to people who have a big interest in anything that involves civil engineering, architecture, design, because that aspect is very prevalent in putting together the World Fair. My next nonfiction was 4 out of 5 stars, so much more up my alley. It is We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib. And as the second part of the title suggests, this is a queer Muslim memoir. In this book, Samra tells us about their life starting from growing up in Pakistan, being part of a religious minority with their parents, with their family, and then eventually immigrating to Canada to start a new life. This was a fantastic and very moving read. A lot about the lack of acceptance that they experienced from the Muslim community, being a queer person. Additionally, it also contains a lot of very hard parts in their life, like being forced into an arranged marriage with their cousin at a very young age, and how they tried to get out of that situation, and in the process having to sever some family ties. What really stood out to me in this book, because it's nonfiction, I don't consider this a spoiler, but even towards the end of the book, they do try to make their religion work for themselves. And I thought that was a very beautiful aspect. Also, their relationship with their family, especially with their mom, is heavily emphasized, and how it changed throughout the years. While I personally am not Muslim and I don't identify as queer, there were a lot of very pivotal moments in this book that I could identify with, and one of them was the expectations that we have as immigrant kids for our immigrant parents, and how my generation maybe benchmarks their parents against something that doesn't really exist in their world. I do have some criticism though. I think it could have been longer. It felt like there were some missing parts in there that could have explained internal changes that they were going through, but I really do recommend it to anybody. It's from a Canadian author, and the audiobook is fantastic. moving on to my one middle grade book that happens to be a graphic novel. It is Ghosts by Raina Telgemeier. This was so beautiful. I really liked the drawings in here. So like the colors, I can't even explain it because I usually don't read graphic novels, but like the style of the photos and the colors were such a nice vibe. It really fit with the story. This is about the siblings Katrina and Maya. So Maya has cystic fibrosis. Did I say that right? Yeah, cystic fibrosis. So that's why the family, so the two girls and their parents moved to Northern California, to a town that is right by the seaside, which is supposed to be better for Maya's lungs and health condition. So Kat is having a bit of a hard time with it. One day their neighbor tells them that the town that they just moved to is haunted. This explores the themes of an unknown future and hidden fears, and it's also about Mexican culture because it is implied that they're half Mexican from their mom's side. I highly recommend this to anybody who has an interest in middle grade and especially middle grade graphic novels, to people who loved Coco, the Disney movie. My one fantasy read was Redawn by Brandon Sanderson and Jancy Patterson. This is a novella that you're supposed to read between the second and third Skyward book. Frankly, I don't have a lot to say about this. It is quite short. It's about 200 pages. Just like Sunreach, the novella that comes before this one, it has a much heavier YA tone to the dialogue and to the synopsis, which I didn't particularly enjoy. But the difference is that this time around, I didn't feel like I learned that many new things. The first novella was much more interesting, but it did remind me of how much I like the actual Skyward series, which starts with this one. To give you a super short summary, this is a YA sci-fi series from Ben Sanderson. Humanity is trapped on a planet. They're constantly under attack by something. They adapted to their new planet, to their new resources or lack thereof, but they're forced to put out fighter pilots to train them and send them to war in jets. And our main character is Spencer, who really wants to become one of those cadets. This one is well done and I really recommend it. I already got my sister onto this, who usually does not read any sci-fi, and she also really enjoyed it. The next one, I do not know how to talk about properly. My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. This is from a Native American writer, and our main character Jade, who is a high school student, is also Native American, or I think it's implied that she's half Native American. I'm mentioning this for later purposes. So Jade is obsessed, and I mean just incredibly obsessed really with slasher movies. This book is filled to the brim with references to, is it like 80s, 70s, 90s slasher movies? As you can tell, I do not know anything about that topic. I have not watched any of the movies that are mentioned in this book. It didn't stop me from understanding everything that she was talking about. So that's all she wants to think and talk about. Her papers that she writes in history class are about slasher movies. And she is convinced that there's going to be a killing happening sometime in the near future because in her head, the final girl has arrived to town. So the concept of the final girl is basically the last person or the last girl standing in these slasher movies, usually the person who outlives everybody else and who ends up killing the killer. So she makes it her mission to bring that girl to her side and teach her everything she knows about these slasher movies in order for her to advance the plot and then kill the killer, whoever that may be, if that person even exists. I believe my current rating of this book is not very high. It is between 2 and 3 stars, but the more I think about it, the more genius this book is. But it is just, it's so much to unpack. And part of that, and I wish I could remember where I read this, I can't remember if this is a direct quote from the author or from an analysis, is that this was a way for the author to unpack the Native American experience. A big part of that is Jade's current social, financial, educational circumstances. The writing style is unique because it is incredibly messy, and that is because we completely live in Jade's head. It feels like a stream of consciousness at all times, and I already told you that she is completely obsessed with this one topic. Obviously so hard for the reader to identify what is real and what's not, what is happening just in her head, and how does it look like to other people. The turn that the story takes was very unexpected, but I didn't dislike it. I am debating whether to pick up the next book or not. I thought this was a standalone. In my opinion, you can completely read it as a standalone. I recommend this to anybody who is a horror film fan, but I also encourage anybody to pick this up who would be interested in reading genre fiction from a Native American author. Recommend it to people who like the stream of consciousness type of prose. This was incredibly unique. I had to hop on Reddit after finishing this book. Moving on to general fiction. So This Shining Life by Harriet Klein. Picked this up for my spring TBR solely because I saw it in the library one day and I liked the cover. I thought the plot sounded interesting. I didn't like this one. I really didn't, unfortunately. So this is a multiple POV story. So this is about family dad being diagnosed with cancer. He passes away. We follow the aftermath through the eyes of his wife, his son, his mom-in-law, and his sister-in-law. This is not a spoiler, it's the premise of the book, I promise. What bothered me the most is that the mom-in-law, she was such a caricature of a man-hating woman who wants to do everything on her own, and in a result of that ends up being not that great of a mom to her two daughters. Didn't love her story. In general, I think that this book just wasn't the cathartic experience it was trying to be. What I did enjoy is that you do have, in the beginning of the book, parts where you see everything from Rich's point of view before he passes away. But because I didn't enjoy a book doesn't mean nobody's gonna enjoy it. So who do I recommend this one to? If you are interested for any reason to read into the topic of grief, I think this still might be worth a read for you. Moving from my spring TBR to a book that was on my summer TBR, I read Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. Actually, this is the German copy. I ended up listening to the English original. Needless to say, this was a huge bestseller. Taylor Swift wrote a song for the movie, so obviously I'm gonna watch it. This was 3 or 3.5 stars for me. In some ways it exceeded my expectations, and in other ways it disappointed me. I went into this not knowing very much and I liked it that way, so I'm gonna keep my summary short. Essentially, we follow Kaya, who is known as the Marsh Girl. She lives out in the swamps and has a very difficult upbringing. She spends most of her childhood and her adolescent years alone. And that is actually already interesting enough for me. There is a mystery subplot in the story, which I could have done without. If I could choose, I would replace that plot with just more of Kaya and understanding how she became the woman that she was towards the end of the book. Although she had so many obstacles, I was much more interested in learning about her upbringing and how she taught everything to herself that she needs to know to survive. Also, instead of that mystery subplot, I would have liked more of the romance because it was kind of short-lived, but I think it could have unfolded into something more deep. Ultimately, I found the character of the bad guy in here quite flat and shallow and not very complex. I do think that the nature writing in here, making the swamp almost a character of its own, I thought that was really nice. In a way, this actually reminds me a lot of this, The Sun Keeper by Erica Bauermeister, which was also a Reese's book club pick, but I think this was better. Then I read Transcendent Kingdom by Yagyazi. Shout out to Jessica from Lady Lovestead Reads because she was the one that brought this book to my attention, and I'm very glad that I read it. Our main character is Gifty, who is a neuroscience student at Stanford University. She comes from a Ghanaian family that immigrated to Alabama. I would say that this story focuses on the issues that she has with her mother in the present time that result from a tragedy that happens to her when she was much younger. This is not an easy read. It features a lot of dark and very hard-hitting topics. Something that this work of fiction has in common with the book We Have Always Been Here that I just mentioned is that it explores religion, especially the relationship that Gifty has with her belief, with her church community over the years. I thought that was a clever way to explain the hardships and the changes that Gifty goes through. The writing is fairly fast-paced. It is quite a short book in general. So what I'm criticizing on this is actually, again, that I think it's too short. Unfortunately, my expectations were at the wrong place. For some reason, I expected us to focus much more on the fact that she is a female and Black neuroscientist at Stanford. But for that journey, the author just kind of scratched the surface. The focus is really more on the trauma from the past and how her mom deals with it at the current moment. This was very frustrating to read at sometimes because Gifty's mom is an avid churchgoer, and at some point she does not get the support that she deserves, and people start to turn their back on her and Gifty's family. I personally listened to the audiobook and I really recommend the taping. And lastly, and I really saved the best for last this time, I read Pure Color by Sheila Heti. I have it twice because I got it from the library. I liked it so much that I got my own copy from Book Outlet though. I didn't pay $30, I paid $10. What is this about? I will attempt to give you a summary. In this world, we live in God's first draft. It is the first draft before he throws it all away and creates a second world that's presumably much better. We have three types of people. We have bird people, people who enjoy the art, who see the beauty in the world. We have fish people. They focus on the well-being of the whole society. They focus on community. They are more selfless. And finally, bear people are people who care about their loved ones, and that is their main focus in life. In part, we look at how relationships between these types of people look like, but that's just a small part. Another part is our main character Mira falling for a woman named Annie, and another part is Mira losing her father and dealing with grief. Those are just some aspects that this book touches on because that just kind of sets the framework to talk about anything and everything. This is lyrical prose to the next level. It is completely out of my comfort zone. It's something I usually don't read or gravitate towards at all. I talked about Open Water from Caleb Azuma Nelson about 2 months ago. That kind of lyrical writing, but 5 steps further. So if you like that book, you might like this one. To be honest with you, I think people will pick this up and either love it or hate it. Also has meta parts where it talks about the art form of writing. It binds the aspect about environment and global warming into that whole theme with God. As I mentioned, grief and love are big parts of this book, but also a lot of contemporary matters. So it also talks about social media and what it does to us. What I found interesting is that it almost reads like a poem, but unlike a poem, this is very frank in its message. One of my favorite chapters was the one about faces and what faces can do to people. I savored this reading experience. I was in no hurry to finish this book. I was not thinking about the next one. Really took my time with it on purpose because every sentence, every chapter had something new to unpack, and the writing was just so beautiful that I didn't want to rush through it. I really wanted to read it on my own time, so that will tell you something. Who do I recommend this to? I recommend this to anybody who enjoys lyrical writing, who enjoys poems. But I also recommend this to people who have tried reading poems before and decided it's not for them because they don't know what the heck that poem is talking about. Because it's like you're reading a poem, but at the same time you're completely understanding what is happening and what the author is trying to say. Anybody who wants to feel like they want to take a step back and just look at a bigger picture rather than their own issues and to-dos at the moment, I think this is for you. Those are the books that I read in June. I'm gonna have fun editing this because I think I've been talking for over an hour. I hope you will never know once I upload this. So let me know if one of these books makes it onto your TBR. If you have read anything that I have mentioned today, chances are you've read Where the Crawdads Sing, so let me know what you thought of that. I will speak to you guys in my next video. Bye.